Last week, the city of Boston delivered a message to about 120 people living in an encampment on Atkinson Street in the area known as Mass and Cass. Residents there were told to remove any tents and other structures they've been living in and to, quote, vacate the area as soon as possible. They were also told they could ask the city for help, including shelter, substance abuse treatment, and relocation back to where they came from. If that sounds familiar, it's because people living at Mass and Cass have seen their homes cleared away before, including in 2019 under then Mayor Marty Walsh, in 2021 under then Acting Mayor Kim Janey, and in January 2022 under current Mayor Michelle Wu. For those of us who don't live or work at Mass and Cass, seeing these scenes repeated again and again can create a sense that not much is changing. But Mayor Wu has made a point of saying that despite continued challenges, things at Mass and Cass are getting better. Here she is late last year in an interview with WBUR.
It is 80%, 90% even better than where we started a year ago, where people were dying on the streets and there were fires and rampant diseases spread from a rodent infestation and just widespread human trafficking in structures that we didn't really know what was going on inside.
Of course, Wu has also called more than once for more help from the state when it comes to Mass and Cass, suggesting that any progress hasn't gone quite as far as she'd hoped. All of which raises a few big questions. When it comes to Mass and Cass, what specifically is Wu doing differently than her predecessors? Is it working for the people living on the streets, but also the homeowners and business owners nearby? And what else could the state be doing that it isn't? Joining me to discuss are my GBH News colleague, Tori Bedford, and former senior editor of the Bay State Banner, Yawu Miller. Thank you both for being here. Tori, in that message that was delivered to the people living on Atkinson Street, I felt like I could sense the city trying on the one hand to strike a tough note while also trying to be empathetic, offering services that people could avail themselves of. How did the residents that you spoke with react to this clearance?
So technically, they don't have a city ordinance, so there's no law that compels anyone to, not put up a tent. So they're emphasizing that it's a voluntary choice to remove your tent from the encampment. But during the actual clearing, workers and people employed by the business district were helping people, but there was a rush. I mean, people were saying, wow, they're making us do this really quickly. A couple of guys were just sitting on the street. They were told, go over to Southampton. There's a police presence.
Shelter near there.
Yeah, just Southampton Street. Just go to the other street. Just clear out of the street. We'll do this, And it has felt, I think, like, you don't have to take your tents down, but we're going to send out this notice that says tents need to be removed. The police will be overseeing and enforcing it, and we will be heavily encouraging you via one-on-one conversations to do that. So it didn't really feel maybe like a choice in the moment.
Can you explain that dynamic to me? Because I don't understand, given the language of the communication that, again, I saw in your tweet, it wasn't presented there as something voluntary, right? It was presented as, we are doing this. If you have a tent or if you have another structure that you've been living in, it needs to go and you need to move somewhere else.
I guess just technically, legally, the city would likely say that it is voluntary and that it's a policy and not, they don't have an ordinance.
Okay, gotcha.
So you have to go, and you said that they needed to vacate as well, which, was implied, but that you can stay. You can stay, you just can't put up a tent. You can have a tarp, but it can't have sides. It raises a lot of questions about what a dwelling is, and what housing is, and what is an encampment. You don't have to leave, but you cannot have any kind of entrenched encampment or tent in the area.
One more question for you quickly before I finally bring you in, Yawu. Were the people who were affected by this on Atkinson Street, are they people who you've seen living in the neighborhood over the past several years, or are they mostly newcomers to the neighborhood?
There's a mix. I mean, every day they do a count. There's different numbers. I think a lot of those people who are out there right now are receiving services, which is why people come to the area: medical, physical health, substance use health, help, all of these different services that are provided in the area. Overnight, I think right now, despite this push for enforcement, a couple days ago, as of Wednesday, there were 16 tents that came back up on Atkinson. I saw someone who I have been seeing there for 4 years, and she just got into the Roundhouse, and now she's, the Roundhouse is
the former hotel right there.
That will be shut down as of July, so she's on a waiting list for temporary, transitional housing at the moment, but I'm not sure what her next step will be. and she's been trying to get services for a while. I spoke to a man named John who's been there for 2 years. There are people, John said, that just have fallen through the cracks, there are other people who have just come in. Maybe they've been there for a few months, maybe a few weeks, and some of those people might receive services. So it feels a little disorganized at the moment to some of the people living there.
Yawu, as I mentioned a moment ago, these are not the only people who are living in the neighborhood. There are homeowners around there. There are business owners who are operating there. How do they feel, broadly speaking, about what's been happening in the neighborhood under Mayor Michelle Wu?
I think people have sort of mixed feelings. They want people to get services. They want people to get the temporary housing, but they don't want, I mean, nobody wants the concentration in their own neighborhood. And I think people in the who live in the Mass and Cass area have sort of borne the brunt of this for the city and also for the region, because people who are coming in here are coming from all over Massachusetts as well as all over New England.
And that was a big part of Mayor Wu's pitch, right? When she was a candidate, saying that she was going to go with a hub and spoke model where maybe you'd see a lot of services still centralized down there, but they'd be dispersed through the metro area, correct?
That's what, well, throughout the city of Boston, yes. And she's also, since then, asked the state to locate more services outside of the city of Boston, which is, I think, a fair ask.
Has the state done that, by the way?
I mean, we haven't seen much movement. I don't know exactly what they've done as far as, citing services outside of Boston, but it doesn't seem to be making a dent in what's happening in Boston. And also, people in Roxbury are saying that most of what is being proposed in and directly around Roxbury. And that's proposed by the city. Pine Street Inn has the Morrissey Boulevard property that they were trying to move forward, and they've just faced some really stiff headwinds there. So,
Tori, can you make sure that I understand correctly what Mayor Wu has done that's different from her predecessors when it comes to providing services that people living around Mass and Cass might want to access? What is she doing differently there?
You talked about the hub and spoke model, and I think when we look right now across the country, every mayoral administration is going through this huge shift in how they approach this issue. So you look at LA, they're hoping to house 4,000 people, I think 1,700 in the next year, right? And that's going to involve putting people in hotels. That's one part, that's a step in the process. I think what Mayor Wu is doing that is different than Mayor Marty Walsh, for example, is that during Operation Clean Sweep, there was no plan for the next step. So it was these tents are dangerous, these tents are a nuisance, get them out of here, a police sweep, right? She's trying to think about each step of the way along a process. We are going to see right now a lot more families coming in. We're going to have a big influx of immigrants coming in terms of what the state is contributing. I know they're having ongoing discussions about Long Island and Shattuck, but those are also steps along a process, right? You may stay at a shelter at Long Island, but you don't want to be in a shelter forever. You don't want to be maybe in at all. You want to be in temporary housing, which transitions to permanent housing. You talk about job placement.
And the Long Island conversation feels like it's been going, it has been going on for years and
but
years.
Even if we just got that, it would just be one step along a process. So I think that, the state just contributed, I think Healy administration just gave $1.7 million for the Mira Coalition to help with immigrant families coming in. Family homelessness and young LGBTQ homelessness is one of the biggest issues that's been rising in recent years. I think it was 10% since the previous year. And it's something that they're going to have to work collaboratively together on, because it's not going to, you can't just address the community that's there right now. There will be more people coming in, and so it's about moving people along a pathway. I think that's significantly different.
Just to make sure that we give the Wu administration credit for changes they may have made, am I right that the push for, remind me of the term of art, low threshold housing that you can get, temporary housing, even if you are not sober, that's something that she's expanded, right?
Yes, she has. I think nearly 600 people have passed through those low threshold housing sites now, according to the city. And it's something that I think is significantly different because it allows people a place to go for a bit of time, to get in touch with a caseworker, to be offered opportunities. She has done things that we have not seen here or in many, many other cities. And I think she's incorporated a lot of harm reduction tactics and harm reduction nonprofits and organizations, and that feels very revolutionary when we think about challenging the status quo of how cities deal with homelessness.
And it's effective. It's proven to be effective, those kinds of policies.
Can you just talk through, for viewers who may not fully understand what harm reduction entails, what kind of policies are we talking about when we use that phrase?
Well, essentially decriminalizing a lot of the things that people who are suffering through substance misuse disorders, a lot of things that they do. In many
So that would
cases,
include drug possession, for
possession.
example?
Yeah, I mean, so basically, like keeping people safe while they're in the throes of addiction. It goes as far as safe injection sites. Those sorts of not interventions, but those sorts of strategies, so that people can get health care. They can do things they can do what they do in a safe way, so they're not going to die on the street. Also the low threshold housing where people can go in if they're not clean, and keeping people off the street reduces their chances that they're going to engage in illegal activity, the chances that they're going to be victimized or that they're going to victimize other people, and it gives people basically a better shot at getting clean.
You brought up we brought up collectively the law enforcement piece. You mentioned Operation Clean Sweep, which I believe, if I recall correctly, was initiated after a Suffolk County jail staffer was attacked, and there was a heavy law enforcement presence there.
32 arrests or something. Yeah.
Yawu, do the neighbors that you talk to who live by the people who are living on the street at Mass and Cass, do they want to see more law enforcement activity, including prosecution of people who are dealing drugs, which is something I remember former Governor Charlie Baker calling for when Michelle Wu was asking for more state help? Is that something they'd like to see ramped up?
I think it's mixed. There are some people who really do want to see that, but I think on the whole, people in Boston and people in Roxbury in particular have for years been advocating for non-criminal interventions. You might recall in the year 2000 there was a ballot question that would basically give judges the power to give people the option to go into treatment instead of incarceration. It was called treatment on demand. Black people overwhelmingly voted in favor of that. The rest of the state rejected that ballot measure. That was when addiction was seen as a black problem. Now that people are looking at it, seeing white people addicted as well, I think the overall statewide attitude toward that has changed.
Seems
obviously.
like it's transformed.
Yeah.
Tori, very quick question for you. We got about 15 seconds for you to answer this. Mayor Michelle Wu saying late last year, 80 or 90% better than it was a year earlier. Does that jive with what you've seen?
I think so, but it's important to remember that it's not linear. So again, we're dealing with each step of this process and getting people into a place where they can be treated like human beings and find jobs and housing, and that requires so many steps and changes along the way. I do think that there have been a significant number of people helped, and I think there are more opportunities than there were before, but there are also, it's just not linear. We'll see what happens, I guess. It's not linear.
Okay, Tori Bedford, Yawu Miller, thank you both.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.